A lot of folks who have played the GBA game may know this old returnee quite well. It is HBY00 Toyworld, with a kit of Break, Hold, Level Drain, Wheel Legs, and the leg ability of Through Fight, with chances for melee attacks to ignore defense when attacking. Now, it is nice to see this guy make his official debut into the game. Not to say that this is going to be his first official debut, nonetheless, because we have seen him in the past before as an enemy bot or maybe an NPC in cutscenes, but this will be his official game debut where he now is officially pullable. He also was mentioned to be a spotlight, so I wouldn't put any major emphasis on trying to pick him up quickly. As you keep pulling, you will eventually pick him up before long. But all that aside, he is honestly pretty solid across the board. Decent armor all around, about 3,100 for the head, about almost 3,400 for the legs, about 2,800 per arm is also pretty good. Break, generally, you can never go wrong with, as it's a gravity-based attack that has boosted success with Metaforce charge. That also is very good for heavy punish. So if you're going up against an opponent that is using 2 or more heavy parts, then the damage bonus from that will become much more evident, and you will very quickly decimate anyone that stands in the way, or very easily cripple them, because typically a lot of gravity-based parts tend to go for legs first. So if you tend to break legs on a heavy opponent, say for instance God Emperor or Death Providence, you are going to slow them to a crawl, which is honestly fantastic for allowing for another nuker to come up behind them that may not be as fast, but enough to just finish the job essentially, and Toyworld does a pretty good job of at least setting up for that. Hold, honestly, is also a pretty conventional ailment skill as it debuffs heat and cool, and I believe it is no defend, if I recall correctly. If it's not no defend, it's no evade, one of the two. Basically makes opponents just a little bit slower, so it's easier to outrun them, and makes it easier to land hits, critical or not. Level Drain, honestly, is a very unique skill, however. We've seen it only a handful of times, but what it does is that it's an ailment skill that attacks the metal skill outright instead of the parts mostly as an ailment. And what it does is that it debuffs the enemy metal's level skill by a certain amount, depending on the rarity of the part, which means that their overall efficiency of the hit becomes progressively weaker. They tend to run just a little slower because they're not as good at using it. They tend to deal less damage because, again, they lose efficiency in the skill. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a bona fide ailment per se, like for instance Hold might be, but if you use it correctly in a team, it can be a very potentially deadly skill, especially if it starts adding up over time. Wheel Legs, you can generally never go wrong with either for that high mobility, arguably, again, one of the highest in the game, at the cost of course, being one of the pickiest when it comes to its terrain bonus matching. So in the moments where Wheel Legs are handy to use, it's optional, especially in particular for melee-based fighters, since Through Fight allows for Toyworld's arms, specifically, as melee skills to chance ignoring defense, which will be extra base damage when attacking, or a chance to bypass a shield that is in play. So the high mobility, pretty solid evade stat at about 1200 as well is also really good. Heavy skill of only a heavy limit of about 1 honestly does hurt it just a little bit, but not too much, and that's relatively easy to manage nonetheless. As a pure set score, I'd arguably rate him out a 6 out of 10. Not to say that he's bad, has bad stats, or has a bad kit, because he honestly is, as scattered as he honestly is pretty decent all around. Unfortunately, he has no real pierce damage potential, aside from his head, which has limited uses, so his role as an ailment fighter is more or less kind of dedicated. Of course, with that being said, also, balancing metal skills will also be a little tricky on him. Personally, I would shoot more with the shooting skill with a minor in melee, since ailments don't necessarily need to have high efficiency to make the most of necessarily. And of course, being wheel-legged means he is really, really picky on the terrains that he's going to move decently on, so that also does kind of hurt his overall viability. However, as mixed parts, I'd rate him just about as equally, maybe just a little bit higher at a 6.5 out of 10, arguably for the reasons stated above. The fact that because his kit is just a little scattered, it does make using him a little tricky as a pure set, but as mixed parts, you could probably make use of them a little easier. Hold, for instance, as a conventional ailment attack to slow down opponents. The head, of course, for a heavy punish for anyone that is in need of That for taking care of anyone that's using 2 or more heavy parts. Wheel legs, just in the general sense that you do need them in the case that you are on a terrain they're good at. But overall, because he's a spotlight, I wouldn't put any effort towards shooting for him immediately, because as time goes on and as you start making more pulls in future banners, he is eventually going to show his face before long. And that being said, I would not put a lot of effort towards grinding for this one.